Today, we're going to break down whether or not buying boxes of cards from your local card store is the equivalent of gambling that you see on Whatnot and Fanatics Live. This is a discussion that I've talked about many times on this channel before. I'm certainly in the camp where the gambling that occurs on these platforms is significantly worse and should not be compared to buying a box from your local card store. But I want to unpack this for you today because Jeremy Lee from Sports Card Live posted something on Instagram and also Twitter, I believe, that raised this question, tried to frame that breaking from your local card store or buying things from your local card store is the equivalent of gambling, and we shouldn't be, separating that from what happens on these platforms. I'm going to sort of unpack, my thoughts on this situation and then go through some of the comments that people have left on the post itself, because from my perspective, like I said, breaking or buying a box from your local card store is chalk and cheese when it comes to using these platforms. And I'll explain why in a second. But fundamentally, this was the post from Jeremy where he said, if Whatnot and Fanatics Live are breaking casinos, then let's be honest, your local card store is one too. Ripping wax has always been gambling, same odds, same risk, different vibe, different decor. It's not about where you rip, it's that you are ripping, which in my opinion is an incredibly surface level assessment of sort of what goes on in this space. Now, I'll quickly caveat this with, one of the issues I've had with people making opinions like this or sharing their thoughts like this or trying to rationalize this situation like this over the last few years is that it significantly downplays the issues that go on when it comes to these breaking platforms. If you're looking at it from a simplistic point of view, I don't think anybody is going to argue that opening a box of cards is a gamble, right? You're trying to chase big, or you're trying to have a bit of fun and you're hoping to get something good, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to get something pretty crap. You're going to get skunked, but it's all for a bit of fun. When you sort of then compare that to what happens on these platforms, this is why I think it's simplistic, is the way in which these products are sold, which makes them completely incomparable in my opinion, because the predatory nature that goes on with some of these breakers and a lot of these platforms, like I said earlier, is chalk and cheese. They're designed to sort of keep you in the room. They're designed to sort of have short, sharp hits up front, i.e. very cheap buy-ins. They're designed to have games and flashing lights around them. They use repacks, they use cards, they use duck races to sort of keep the buzz going. And they're very much focused on that quick hit, getting that quick high, chasing that feeling of hitting something big. And there's a word there that I'm looking for that's often used in the hobby. I can't think of it right now, but it's very much designed to sort of keep that feeling going and keep people in the room and keep people chasing. And it's one of those ones that when you see, the argument frame like this, it really trivializes the issues that go on in this space, because going into a breaking room and then the way in which those things are sold is a very different experience to going into most card stores, if not all card stores, right? Because you're walking in, buying a box, walking out. Or you're walking in, you're buying the box, you're busting it, and then you sort of walk out as well, right? You're not, they're actively spending crazy amounts of money. And if you are, you're not being pressured to sort of buy more like you see on these platforms. And the reason why I think it's a big problem on these platforms is because there's no real, regulation or monitoring from them to make sure that people are doing the right thing. And you walk into so many of these and you see these scams happen, you see the art of the sale, which is the problem. Now, obviously on face value, you can say they're both gambling, you're both chasing something, right? But you can't compare them. When you compare them as simplistic as this, you're sort of downplaying the real issues that are, there front of mind. Now, I'll share the comment that I left on this initially where I talk about the fact of what I just explained. It's the process, it's how they're sold, it's how they're marketed, and it's the limited controls around how they're being sold on these platforms that is the distinct difference. Sure, you simplify it, you make it out like gambling is the same for both, but it's the process in which they're sold that is the stark difference. Now, Jeremy responded and said, there are differences for sure. It's all still a gamble. My response to him there, like you can see on screen, is that I think that narrative, like I just explained, is a bit of a straw man argument that many people have pushed over the years to sort of downplay these issues, to make it out like everything's above board and to try and normalize the behavior that you see on these platforms within this industry. Now, like I say over here, the way in which they're sold, marketed, and pushed on customers are materially different. Breaks and repacks are the Wild West, and the sales tactics used are predatory in nature. I offered to go on his live to have a chin wag about it. And he goes on to say that, right, and like I said, different vibe, different decor, but you can lose your shirt in an LCS too. But again, I think that's very, very simplistic. Now, collectorsmd, who I've shouted out before on the channel, they've reached out to me. I've not had time to sort of speak to them, so I do apologize if they're seeing this. They're essentially around trying to bring support to the breaking community and try and help people that are sort of, digging themselves holes in this space. And we've talked about it a lot on this channel, the addiction that happens, the debt that people have gone in. I think a month ago we spoke about somebody being like $600,000 in debt if I remember correctly. You're hearing those stories all the time. There's various YouTube videos, I should say, talking about this, and there's lots of people commenting saying the same sort of thing. You go on Reddit, you see people say the same sort of thing. So it's a problem that happens in this space that people don't care enough about. CollectorsMD is trying to fix that. But what he says over here is that he couldn't agree more with what I said. Not just what you're buying, it's how it's presented, marketed, and executed. Breaks and repacks often borrow the mechanics of slot machines. They're fast-paced, FOMO heavy, no clear regulation, and designed to keep you in the room. He goes on to say that it's not about shaming the platforms, it's about calling attention to an environment that becomes increasingly dangerous, or that's become dangerously normalized, is what I'm trying to say there. I can't read. The average collector doesn't realize how easily these systems hijack impulse control and mimic gambling behavior, which is the point I've always made, right? You know, I see a place for Whatnot. I see a place for Fanatics Collect or whatever their sales platform is, Fanatics Live. You know, I'm not saying they should go away. All I've simply said over the last 3 or 4 years is that they need to fix things to stop this behavior from being normalized, to stop this behavior from putting people, you know, in bad situations. And people will always defend and say that people can do what they want. They should protect themselves from themselves. You can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. But that is bullshit, because when you have sales tactics like this that are designed to sort of get into that part of your brain, people can't help themselves. And that does not make me feel okay to sort of see it happen and not speak up about it. Now, he goes on to say that we're not saying every break or breaker is evil. I, again, have never said that. We're saying the ecosystem needs guardrails and consumers deserve transparency, support, and education, which is primarily what his page is focused on. And I completely agree with that sentiment, right? We're not asking for this thing to go away. We're saying you guys need to fix it before somebody else fixes it for you. And I've said this for, 4 years now. When I first raised this 4 years ago, all the talking heads on YouTube and social media laughed at me. And that was, we're going to see regulation at some point. You know, it's either going to be regulation that Fanatics imposes on the industry, or it's going to be regulation that the taxman comes in and says, hey, you want this crap happening. This is gambling. We see it this way. All it takes is one person to complain to the local congressman, and this spirals into, a lot of tax revenue that's going unchecked by the government, right? And that's going to happen at some point. So, my message has always been, fix it before someone fixes it for you. Because if they fix it for you, it's going to be worse than what it is right now. Now, you can sort of see that Burbank Sports Cards have also replied to this comment. And obviously, being a local card store owner, one of the biggest ones in the country, he might be a little biased with what you're about to hear me say that he said. But I think he's been in the game for so long that you have to listen to what he says. Now, he goes on to say that as a shop owner, he won't understand the argument that Jeremy's trying to phrase here, i.e. they're not the same, they should not be compared. Like I said, it's a very simplistic thing in my opinion. He said it's common for product that sells for $450 on your LCS shelf to then sell for $750 or more when divided into break spots and the like on these platforms. And then goes on to say that, the average price and the shipping and handling, all that kind of thing just grows and grows and grows. So, the entry point from a finance perspective is very, very different. And then, the fractionalization of it, as Rob often puts it as, makes it a problem, right? It gets worse and worse. It's not the same. You're not selling the same product, right? So in my opinion, it is very simplistic. Like I said, I'm repeating myself now, but I want to hear what you have to say down below, because this kind of argument, as it's come up time and time again, does not make sense to me. Now, I'm all for people sharing their opinions and having this debate. I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't be talking about it, but I don't like the fact that it sort of normalizes the behavior that you sort of see from these platforms. They're not the same thing. And when you simplify it to that point of being the same thing, you then don't get the pushback that should be happening to make sure that these breakers and these platforms are doing more than what they currently are. I've given examples in the past from Cherry Collectibles, and you guys are probably sick of this if you watch my channel on the regular. Their owner has gone on the record and talked about he's had a number of customers that they've sort of seen enter their breaking room night on night, and they blocked them, right? They stopped them from participating because they can see the amount of money they've spent, and they said, hey, you probably need a break. So they're thinking about their customers in that regard, but there are plenty of breakers on these platforms that are not doing that. And that becomes a problem when, like you've heard me say today, and like about breaking, where they've got all these flashing lights, they've got all these games, they've got all this, pressure to keep you in the room, they're getting you to spend, they're getting you to chase. It's very easy for somebody to press a button. It's very easy to pressure somebody to stay for one more hit, one more hit, one more hit. Next minute, because you're not thinking about the big picture, you're tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And it's so easy to press a button that, your impulse control isn't really there. And it's very different to physically going into a store and buying a box. The nature of going into a store, driving there, walking in, grabbing a box, paying for it is enough of a blocker on you to sort of do that multiple times, because you're like, shit, that just cost me $400 and I got nothing. I'm going to walk back over there, get in my car, buy another one, repeat. It's not the same. You seeing them going bang, 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 buying all these freaking breaks, buying all these spots is not the same. And that is the difference. So that needs to be kept front of mind when these kinds of conversations are happening. So I'm rambling. I want to hear what you guys have to say, because I know from when I've talked about this before, a number of you have said in the comments that they are in fact the same thing, and we shouldn't be making a distinction about them in any way, shape, or form. So it is what it is. Share your thoughts down below. I just thought this was a good thing to talk to. If Jeremy wants to have me on a live to talk about this a little bit more, I'm more than happy to. Without repeating myself again, I just think they are chalk and cheese. These things are not comparable purely for the way in which they are sold. And, you know, the long story short is, if we continue to sort of compare them that way and sort of trivialize the situation and downplay the fact that there are material differences between these two things, I think we're going to see, you know, industry get worse and worse. And maybe that's just me, you know, making a mountain out of a molehill again. But until we see some proper controls over these platforms and how these breakers operate, you're going to see issues off the back of how these repacks are sold. So it is what it is. Thanks for watching, guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.